I think that's you, John.
Oh, okay. Wel, fesger ma Hutchison, hamoontier eke an da hwtch, gle hollichtje agus mochel, a gwr faltje chriel a hwle dunje lein a noch. Has sin a gwr faltje gusonglichtje Anna agus Sheena. Cavel Sheena. Oh, faltje Sheena. She dunje priesel of Simon. So, it's me, Ian Margusten. I'm John Hutchison. It's my pleasure tonight to chair, I suppose, this event, courtesy of Community Land Scotland, as part of the Simon Fraser series of lectures. And Eigg is delighted to host this tonight. We've welcomed the people online. We've welcomed the people in the hall here. We've particularly welcomed Anna and Sheena, Anna, Simon's wife. We were exceptionally fond of Simon Fraser on this island. Many here were. Many loved Simon, and it's impossible to put into words our understanding of Simon's love of Eigg. Thankfully, Anna says that Simon loved Eigg, so there's no competition in a way. So thanks for that endorsement, Anna. We're a wee bit wary about putting that across. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So tonight will be informally formal. We'll kind of work it, formally informal. That's a bit better. And so we're grateful for the support of Community Land Scotland and Ian Craig's work, particularly in the hall today, trying to bring things together. We hope this would be a live stream, but it's not. But hopefully we'll have hundreds and thousands of viewers on Monday, Ian. But thank you very much for what you've been doing to put this together. Many on the live stream will also have been touched by Simon's kindness and support over many, many years and benefited from his ability and determination. Simon enriched all of our lives. So my role tonight is to welcome everyone, give my own reflections on Simon, introduce the panel here, the wise panel, and, well, most of them, and introduce Dr. Kenny Taylor, and help discussion and sing a song. And there'll be a toast run by Maggie and Stuart, and then maybe another song, or the Eigg musicians, that's right. And then we'll say Eigg to those on the live stream. People on the live stream shouldn't be worried that we'll be switching the live stream off. They won't be missing anything, because as soon as the live stream goes off, we'll have our Horlicks and go to bed. So it'll be fine if you're not missing anything. So really briefly here, we have Anne Fraser, Simon's wife. We have Colin Carr. Colin's here as one of the pillars. I think I've got that right from the time of the buyout. And I remember on that day I said, Colin, what's your role here? And Colin said, well, I'm the man with the sports jacket. And so he was, and I don't think we've seen the sports... I was going to put it on tonight, but it wouldn't fit me. I don't think we've seen the sports jacket since then, but anyway, that was that. And we've got Nora Barnes, who is the SWT Ranger, Dr. Kenny Taylor, our main speaker tonight. Thank you, Kenny. And we've got Stuart Ferguson and Maggie, who are going to... Stuart, sorry, is chair of the Isle of Eigg Residents Association, and Maggie, secretary of Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust. They're going to propose the toast later on. So that's the august body that are here tonight. So I should also give apologies from Michael Foxley, a dear friend of Eigg, who couldn't manage over. And unless I give Michael's apology, I'll really get it in the neck next week. So, Michael, we're sorry you're not here. Maggie asked me to give a bit of my background to help, particularly people online, understand what my role's been. And if Maggie asked me to do it, then you know how these things work. I better do it. And I think I've been a good friend to Eigg for almost 50 years now. I hope I've been a good friend anyway. And in fact, Maggie, I'm just thinking about this, that within the next 2 weeks will be 50 years since I arrived in Fort William to be the divisional road engineer here and start sending all that bitmac out to Eigg as we used to do. So, because before I was Lochaber area manager, when I got involved in Eigg, I was the road engineer, and we used to send, believe it or not, 500 tonnes of compamac a year. That's coal setting tarmac in most people's language. 500 tonnes a year to Eigg, and 500 tonnes a year the next year to Noida, to bring all the roads up to standard. And there was actually a formal complaint made about me to the Regional Council's Chief Executive by Schellenberg, and the complaint was about the number of scrap cars on the vehicles, scrap cars on the island. There were piles of them at one point, and the complaint was against me because I was improving the roads so much the cars were going faster and they were having crashes. And that, believe it or not, is actually true. That is true. Yeah. Thankfully, the Chief Executive had more to do with his time than to pursue that complaint. Anyway, thinking more about the buyout and Simon's role in all of this to those online, it's important for people first of Eigg to know that the Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust is not Land Reform Act compliant. There are 3 members. There's Isle of Eigg Residents Association, the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Highland Council, and each of those bodies nominate directors onto the board. And apart from that, there's an independent chair, and that's where I came in, because over one of these periods I was the chair. So the Highland Council nominated Councillor Michael Foxley, Councillor Charlie King, Michael Foxley and Charlie King as their nominees at that time. And my job as Council Area Manager was to back them up and help make Eigg work. That was my job really at that time. But it was the inclusion of the Scottish Wildlife Trust that made all the difference to the other public bodies and grant-giving bodies. And we'll hear more about that from Kenny tonight. So once I retired, I was asked to be the chair. So clearly there was no time off for good behaviour over that period. And being the chair for over 8 years of the Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust was one of the privileges of my life. So I met Simon as the first independent chair in 1996, and Michael Foxley apologises tonight, and in the obituaries appeared a quotation from Michael that said, "No matter how much support community ownership had on the ground, no matter how much backing we got from politicians, the public or the media, we would never have succeeded without someone who was always on top of the legalities and never less than 2 moves ahead of the other side in any negotiation." And that someone was Simon Fraser. So that's Michael's take on it. So Simon didn't only shape the initial Isle of Eigg Trust and help us through the buyout, but he stayed on for 7 years as the chair. And he had the leadership ability to hail our endeavour here as a noble cause. Just think about that, a noble cause. Gradually I discovered I had many links in common with Simon. We were in the same place politically, and we had a link through, surprisingly enough, through Mallingonish in Harris, because in 1974 I went to Renegradale, which is a bit further east from Mallingonish, with an organisation called the Schools Hebridean Society, and we took 20 boys there climbing and sailing and doing different things. And I got them involved in doing a survey for the first road line from Marrig to Renegradale, and eventually we drew that up and put it into HIDB at that time. And eventually the Corley used my drawing to put the road into Renegradale. And of course the way you get to Mallingonish most easily is to drive to Renegradale now and go across on the boat. And we also did a survey of Mallingonish. So, and eventually about 10 years later we think Simon and his family bought Mallingonish. So Simon was kind of utterly gobsmacked that I had this survey from 1974. So that was one link. I felt every hour spent with Simon was worthwhile, a learning experience, good fun, and we got the job done as well. Some of you here will remember our experiences in Neudert, with the Neudert buyout 2 years later than Eigg, and that was a really tough job, and with lots of twists and turns, not straightforward. And I've got this fax on my wall that I got from Simon in January 1999. You've maybe seen this, and it's a bird with a big beak like a toucan or a pelican or something like that. And this frog is going down the throat, going into this big beak. But the frog has got his hands round the neck of this bird. Okay? So the bird's trying to swallow this and the frog's hanging on. And the caption is, "Don't ever give up." Simon, and it's a brilliant thing, and I've still got that. So that's the effect that Simon, had on me. And during the Neudart campaign, we spent a weekend in Lochaber House. It's a council office in Fort William at that time, and Simon stayed with us for 3 nights. And I seem to remember a couple of bottles of Black Bottle had a fair scalp over that period. And but we got the title deeds from Cameron McIntosh's lawyer, because Cameron was going to buy Neudart and lease it to the community, and the community said, no, we don't want to do that, thanks very much. So we had all these split off writs and title deeds and everything, and plans spread all over the table in Lochaber House, and Simon went through all the legals, and my job was to look at the land plans and see that they all matched up and there were no gaps in how they fitted together, and plot all these sold pieces of land on this bigger plan. And apart from being a good fun weekend with Simon and an interesting thing to do, for me it was a desperately sad weekend to see all these bite-sized chunks taken out of Neudart Peninsula over the years, where the assets were stripped. So a great weekend with Simon. And then my last connection with Simon in a way on was in the Oban Times obituary in 2016 by Jim Hunter, and they used my image of Simon at the opening of the tea room for that, where I'm quoted as saying, Simon made everyone feel involved and feel that we were engaged in something truly transformational. I remember that his speech at the celebration on the 12th of June 1997 included, the purchase of this island by this community is one in the eye for anything that is mean-spirited or self-serving. So, a really important phrase that day, and it's even difficult to say it because it was so poignant at the time. So something truly transformational is what we've been involved in here, and that's what the whole land movement, hopefully many people online are involved in trying to achieve transformation. And that's why the current situation in Slate with the Clandonald Land Trust is disturbing, to say the least, and extremely disappointing, but we'll see what happens next. So those are my reflections of Simon. Many happy times and challenging times, but he was a great teacher to me. I think every time I was with him, I learned things, and that's it. So I've given a rough introduction to the panel. Anne Fraser, Colin Carr here of the Sports Jacket, and Nora Barnes, and Stuart's here, Stuart Ferguson, and Maggie Fife. So it's a very pleasant job now to introduce Kenny Taylor. So Community Land Scotland website cites Taylor as Dr. Kenny Taylor, FRSA, a well-known figure in the world of conservation as an ecologist, writer, editor, broadcaster and musician. Currently chair of the Scottish Wildlife Trust, he was previously chair of the North of Scotland Local Group and convener of the Trust's Conservation Committee. Kenny was involved when SWT supported this community for the buyout of the Isle of Eigg in 1997 as chair of Trees for Life through the purchase of Dragon, and more recently in the campaign to save Cool Links and the establishment of Riverwood. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome Kenny Taylor?
Thanks very much, John, and it's obvious it's a real pleasure to be back here and be in this hall where so many good events have been held, where so many good nights have been enjoyed by many of, well, all of you in front of me, and some of them have participated in. So it's a privilege to be here, but also it's a great privilege to be here to partly honour Simon Fraser, who I was able to know a little bit, not as much as John did, through the buyout and a bit beyond, and was always struck by Simon's gentle focus, I would say, in some ways. There was a warmth to the man, and there was a way that Simon had of making you feel at ease, but also making you feel that certain things were possible that maybe you'd previously thought were impossible. So that's partly what I'll come back to in the course of the next wee while. I better check what time I've got, because I was planning, you know, only to speak for about 2 hours here, so I hope that kind of suits you here. And also, because my lectern is this charming bar stool here, so thanks for the loan of that. It's quite possible that some of the notes, I won't be reading from them, but except to get some quotes, that if I cowp those over, then you're going to get the memorial lecture remix, I'm afraid, here, so I hope that won't happen. But anyway, here we are on the 4th of April. Quite a day, 4th of April, because that's the day that things were concluded and the deal was done for Eigg there. June the 11th, obviously, was the official handover and the celebration that's been marked every year since. But this very day, April 4th, 28 years ago, that's when, and I can conjure up, as many of you can, the pictures that were taken there. There was Simon, there was Colin Carr, and there was Nick Reiter with a bottle of champagne about to be popped. And that made national and international news because Eigg had done it. The combination through the Heritage Trust had done it and secured what we now know is a successful buyout and set in train all the things that all of you here have benefited from ever since. And what I'll argue in the course of the next wee while is that so many people across Scotland have benefited from in terms of ideas that are generated about how things are done in Eigg. And more than that, I think internationally, the importance was realising the importance of the ideas that actually make Eigg tick. So I'm afraid I'll have to kind of look at some waymarks in what I'm going to say here, but I'll see how I get on, and say if this cowps over, then I'll just freeform it, and then we can break for everything else, including toasts and music earlier. But anyway, I'll come back to aspects of Simon and his influence in just a little while. But I felt that I couldn't start also without honouring other absent friends. As you all know, it's been a hard winter on Eigg, not particularly in weather terms, but because there are several people who have been lost to the community that meant a heck of a lot to that community. My old friend John Chester Bird died in December, and he's somebody that I'll come back to again in the course of the next wee while in terms of some of his thoughts and some of the contributions that he made through both his absolute love of this place and its wildlife, but also the role that he played in making wildlife and natural heritage such an obvious part of what became the successful buyout campaign. Eddie Spoons, somebody who, in terms of percussion skills, was known both in Easter Ross and here as just a great person to have in a ceilidh band. But also with Eddie, I'm struck by the way that through his horticultural skills and his knowledge of botany, he really focused on the native bluebell, and the collection of seeds that's continuing with that is something that, you know, Eddie made a great difference to, and I think will hopefully continue. And then also young Neve, who I didn't have the pleasure of knowing, but I know was an inspiration to many of you on the island, and, you know, to having grown up here but then moving away and making her name in music. And I just think of what Johnny on the island said, that she was becoming known as a techno Viking, so that sounds like quite a good combination to me. So I couldn't possibly honour one absent friend without giving a nod to 3 other absent friends. And as I say, with John, with Bird, I'll come back to some of him in a little while. So the general plan with this is that I'll dig into a wee bit of history. I'll look at some aspects of the buyout in relation to the Scottish Wildlife Trust's involvement. I'll look at some background to the Scottish Wildlife Trust as an organisation and its overall history, but also very much its links to Eigg. And I'll chuck some ideas into the mix that I hope will stimulate thought. You might not agree with them, but I'll just try and see what I can put in terms of thinking about nature and community and ways forward at these times, as we know, and you're very switched on about this, literally and metaphorically in Eigg, of a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis, and what sort of things can come through community empowerment and community ownership of the land that actually take things forward in ways that other communities that don't have the privilege of that ownership could learn from. So that's part of the mix, and I'll chuck in a few bit of culture as well, with some just very brief quotes from some poetry and other things. So that's the general plan. So in terms of nature and people, and obviously called this trusting people to be wild, part of my motivation with that is thinking that we still see sometimes, sadly, conservation versus jobs rhetoric, and as if there's a chasm between us as a species and everything else that we're sharing the planet with. Why on earth should there be? It doesn't need to be like that, but particularly in certain situations, it suits certain people to make that divide. And as we know, sadly, we're living in times where creating divides between groups seems to be the nature, not least, of international geopolitics. And things that are the reverse of what I see on Eigg have risen to be the sort of thing that you can't switch on your news media without hearing about divide, divide, divide. Well, part of the divide that is perceived in some quarters is the divide between people and nature. And I think that's downright wrong, and I think Eigg actually proves it in large measure, that it's completely wrong, and it's the wrong way to be thinking about things at a time when we should be moving forward for ourselves in our communities, but also for the planet in a much more productive way. So I'll reference John Bird now in terms of thinking that back in the day, and I first met him not long after he'd come here, actually, in the summer of 1986. And there's some of you in the room here that weren't even born, I think, back then, but back in the day. And yeah, very much warmed to John's approach to things. But John said to me from the outset that he realised that Eigg was a place where he didn't see that conflict between people and nature. It was one of the things that attracted him, one of the many things that attracted him to become a permanent resident here, was he just felt that you got it in terms of wildlife and people. So when he arrived, I spent quite a crazy few days with him in typical fashion, stravaiging around what seemed like every last bit of the island. I've literally not been in some of those bits of the island since that time. So the during the day aspects of it were fairly knackering. But then, of course, that was combined with first encounters with some of the good folk in this very hall here, and basically, dramming and more, down in Cleedale was something that actually was testing my stamina, building, burning the midnight oil at both ends. I remember two things. There was an old, one of the real elders of the community, communion know the name, was it Dodie? Yeah. There was one of these sessions down in Cleedale, and it was really intriguing because he was testing me out. You know, I'd arrived as this greenie that had come to see, John. And we were talking about the shearwaters that breed at the top of the slopes in reduced numbers, sadly. But I mean, obviously in the past, there used to be so many shearwaters along that top and along that one of the bynames for Eigg people was Fachach. The fat ones, not because of any particular obesity in the community, but it was the name for the fat young of the Manx shearwater. And that was used as a source of food. So there had to be thousands of them back in the day with that. And anyway, he said to me, oh yes, the shearwaters. Excellent for waterproofing your boots. You know, you just take one of them and you turn it upside down and you squeeze it a wee bit and you get this. And he was trying to see, who was going to blink first, basically. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. Yes. And then we continued the conversation in a wider way after that. But I thought, yeah, it was great actually to meet somebody who in his own lifetime remembered the harvesting of that bird. And both that's culture linked to nature in one way, but also it showed maybe some of the decline in that species in recent times. And you've got to think, why might that actually be? So the final thing from that summer was that John said to me when I was about to get the boat and about to think how I was going to cope with driving back to Lagan with a fairly major hangover, but he said to me, Kenny, now from now on in, I'm a Scottish Wildlife Trust, I'm an Eigg resident first, and I'm a Scottish Wildlife Trust employee second. And that was quite a bold thing to do as a statement to somebody who was in effect his line manager at the time, because it was so I went onto the boat and pondered this, and because initially you think, whoa, that's quite a statement. But over the years that followed, and right to this day, I get it. I absolutely get what he was meaning, because John had felt that this was a place with wildlife and people, and landscape and culture all together in something that he warmed to. So his statement was right, and he stayed here through the rest of his life. So from now on, he thought that. Thinking of Simon and thinking of elemental natures, the elemental nature of people and place, one of the things that I know Simon really blew the dust off and reinstated and slightly morphed it a little bit was, in legal terms, what's termed giving sasign. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it in the right way. So, yeah. And on a couple of occasions, at least, there may have been more, because obviously Simon was involved in multiple buyouts, as John has described. What he said really struck a chord with me. So sasign was basically a ceremony to represent the formal handover of land from one owner to another, usually on an individual basis. But what, as far as I understand it, Simon was doing was actually changing that to be the handover to a community with that. And I'll read what he said in North Harris in 2003. He said, I hereby deliver into your hands stone and earth of this land, and in so doing, so give unto the North Harris Trust true and lawful sasign of those whole lands of North Harris, from the low tide of the sea to the highest mountain tops, ab cielo usque ad centrum, from the sky to the centre of the earth, to be held on behalf of the people of North Harris in all time coming. And translation from the Gaelic that ended, and all of us who are gathered here right now wish you and every generation to succeed, and that you'll find all the blessings in the land that our Lord has given you to inherit. So sky and earth and stone and sea, elements of life for all of us, but that was embodied within the giving of Sasain, and there's pictures of the handing over of the stone and the earth there. A further thing, and linked to that, is the concept which I think seems to be much more common in Gaelic culture. I'm not a Gael and I don't speak Gaelic other than I was saying to Anne earlier. I know one sorely short lyric parrot fashion, but that doesn't really count as being a Gaelic speaker. But within Gaelic, the concept of attachment to the land and responsibility for that, the concept of duchas that's coming back in, and I'll make further reference to duchas in a wee while, but this sense of connection to the land. And there's a quote from a crofter in Harris speaking to Fiona Mackenzie a few years ago, which I think is pertinent. He says, "There's no sense of ownership, it's a sense of belonging. You're part of the land, it's your heritage. In Gaelic, you never think about the land belonging to you. It's you that belongs to the land. The people belong to the land. That's the only connection that's made in relation to people and land. Not people belong to the land, not just the land, but the whole concept of belonging to it. Anything that goes with the life we live here. They're inherited rights that nobody can argue with." So that's a pretty powerful concept. And duchas, I think, really is encapsulated within that. And duchas in itself gave its name to a project that Vanessa, who's here tonight, was involved in the late 90s through to 2001, which was connecting to communities around parts of the north of Scotland, and both hearing what people were experiencing and thinking about their own communities, but also thinking of moving forward in ways that could empower those communities to do more for themselves. So duchas is something I know also within Community Land Scotland. Both Ailsa Rayburn and Josh have written about that recently, and maybe duchas is something that, again, it's becoming something that seems to connect with a lot of us in terms of our ideas. It's time to, keep duchas fresh. But in terms of connection to land, I know at a personal level, one of the things that tickles my imagination is that in my forebearers, and we're going back a few generations, so one set of my great-great-great-grandparents, and obviously we've all got rather a lot of great-great-grandparents, so I don't want to overdo it. But anyway, the thing that tickles me is that this one pair of great-great-grandparents and their family farmed at Mossgiel in Ayrshire. They were literally next door to Robert Burns and his brother Gilbert at the time. And in fact, one of the sons of that family wrote about aspects of his experience of hanging out with, well, he didn't use that expression, but of knowing what he called, Jean Armour's children. And that was the telling thing in the stuff that was written down. I thought, well, that seems real. He's not saying he knew Robbie Burns himself. He was talking about the children. But anyway, Mossgiel in Ayrshire in the late 1700s, that was when my forebears were there. That's when Robert Burns turned over a mouse's nest in November of 1785 with his plough. And what he said in part of the poem that he wrote about turning over that mouse's nest with a plough, and I just love the Scots words in it actually, so I'll impose it on you because I just love the language. So, "Wee sleekit coorin timorous beastie, oh, what a panic's in thy breastie. You shouldna run awa so hasty with bicker and brattle. I would be laith to run and chase thee with murder and pattle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union and justifies that ill opinion of me, your poor earthbound companion and fellow mortal." He then goes on with other things, but think of what's encapsulated in that. You've got an 18th century Scot who is saying, "I get it, I've messed up your life, fellow mortal and small creature that I'm sharing this farm with. I've really messed it up for you, and I feel it, and if you're angry at me, it's justified because I'm the reason for your the challenge of trying to spend the winter without your nest. So that is something that sticks in my head from around that time. But of course, that time was a time when Scotland as a whole was undergoing huge transformation. And basically between 1750 and 1850, Scotland went from a predominantly rural population, more than 60% rural, probably about 70% in 1750, to by 1850 it was predominantly urban. So that was one of the most rapid transformations of any society anywhere in Europe over the next 200 years. And think of what that means. It means that huge numbers of people who called Scotland home were then losing their connection to the land and their own communities in so many different ways. I think with my own forebearers, those great-great-great-grandparents were subject to what Tom Devine has called the lowland clearances, because by the early 1800s, they didn't have that farm anymore. They were working for other people on their farms. They probably got turfed out because they couldn't afford the improving lease. You know, factor comes along and says, oh, I think you could do with some new drainage here. And they do it, and then a year on, the factor comes back and says, oh, drainage has worked really, really well. So yeah, that will mean that your rent is now 30% higher than it was a year ago. Oh, I can't pay that. Well, that's a shame because you can't stay here if you can't pay it. So the lowland clearances moved a huge number of people in Scotland at the time, followed, of course, in that same period by the highland clearances. And what was happening there was that so many people were losing their connection to land, and they were losing their connection, in many cases, to the commons. On the Black Isle, where we live, then the Black Isle Commons, the commonty, was, as far as I can see, stolen by a few major landowners who happened to be the main ones that could vote at the time and also could help to set the laws. So they carved out the commons and the top of the Black Isle between them. And that meant that the enclosures came in, the farms were created, and in so doing, the community lost its direct link to the land that had been seen as a common resource. So a lack of empowerment, a lack of responsibility, a lack of connection, major, major things. For the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and this is taking a side turn here, then obviously John's mentioned this. Nora is here representing the Scottish Wildlife Trust on the island. I'll just give you a wee bit of history to kind of fill in some of the background of the Scottish Wildlife Trust and hopefully explain more about our connection with this island and this community. So the Scottish Wildlife Trust was formed in 1964 in the Central Belt. It was a large landowner, Sir Charles Connell, that was behind that, but it widened out quite quickly from 1964. So the first reserve was at the Loch of the Lows, where if your internet is working, I'd recommend the Loch of the Lows live webcam from the osprey nest, because there's all sorts of things going on in that osprey nest at the moment, and the female who lost her mate last year is trying to suss out which young blood she's going to go with this year. So lots of things in the Loch of the Lows. I know.
It happens.
And it happens. So I don't want to stray too far into Bridget Jones, mad about the boy territory here, but that's going on at the moment. Following on from that, then the Trust now is involved in about 100 different places classed as reserves. The involvement on Eigg, at least in formal terms, started back in 1976. So this is actually the 50th summer since an agreement was signed between the Scottish Wildlife Trust and Keith Schellenberg to designate certain areas of the island as so-called reserves. I've never thought that actually made much sense in a place like Eigg, but there you have it. That's what they were classed as. They later became, a few years down the line when the Wildlife and Countryside Act kicked in, they were largely what is now the Eigg Sites of Special Scientific Interest. So things began then, but I don't think much was done at that time more than that. Come 1984, Lorna Eide, who some of you in the room know and knew, became the first ranger naturalist in spring and summer, and spent 2 years doing that, I think 84, 85. Then John Bird came here in 86, and the rest, as you know, is history, some of which that I've described already. So John's work, with the wildlife recording, with walks, with kind of management of invasive species in different woodlands as much as he could was one thing, although he always complained that actually it was really hard to do as much as you really needed to in conservation terms, because the need to go through the landowner was just stymieing things very often. So John felt absolutely hogtied by the lack of ability to be able to control what was going on in quite a lot of the land. But obviously, and now leading in to what became the successful buyout, one of the things that stands out from that time, which was not least for the man and his family, two people to my left here, was a really traumatic time, was the time when there was the threat to evict you and your family from Kildonan, and also to evict John from Miller's Cottage. Dreadful, dreadful time. But actually the photograph that was taken of John at that time outside Miller's with, I think one of your passing sheepdogs actually was visiting, but there was a picture of him there. And John looking, I was going to say woebegone, but John very often, was... I don't know if St Mirren had lost yet again, but far be it from me to say. Anyway, he was looking very Johnish. And the dog was, a well-trained dog, because the dog was kind of... and that photograph sort of encapsulated so much about, just what was wrong about this flipping setup, that not just an island, but a community was being bought and sold, for whoever's gold could come from, whatever part of the country there was. So I remember that very much. But in the lead up to that, other things had gone on beforehand in terms of Scottish Wildlife Trust involvement, firth of the island. One of the most significant aspects of that was in the mid-80s, 86 into 87, there had been some discussions following a Scottish Wildlife Trust conference between various people. Jeff Watson, Vanessa's late husband, Frank Rennie from Golson, John Love, Vanessa herself, were saying, right, this conservation versus jobs, nature versus people thing, it's gone too far, so what are we going to do about it? So that then led to further discussion within the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and the Scottish Wildlife Trust linked together with interested parties, including very quickly the Arkleton Trust, World Wide Fund for Nature, Crofters Union, I think, through Frank's good offices. And plans were made for a big conference called Land, Wildlife and Community that took place at the Dramossy Hotel above Inverness in 1987. And the subtitle of that conference was A Highland Forum. And again, many of you in the room will remember the organisation that was Highland Forum, and also then quite quickly became Highlands and Islands Forum. And in its own way participated in a number of things in the lead up to the buyout attempts here, and also the successful buyout, including workshops. There was one, I think, that was actually held in Peggy Kirk's house to scope out, to hear people's grievances, to think what was the way forward. So it's something that in terms of the Wildlife Trust's involvement is sometimes not recognised, that we two, in partnership, very much in partnership, played our part in these steps going towards the buyout. So by the time of that campaign, it meant that, luckily, it seemed that it was common sense for a lot of people to invite the Scottish Wildlife Trust to become part of the Heritage Trust, together with the representatives of the Highland Council and together with elected representatives from the Eigg community. And that's really how it came about. And then through that, through the kind of roller coaster of what followed, then the Scottish Wildlife Trust was able to connect with its network, which included people across Scotland and also people across the UK through what's known as the Royal Society for Wildlife Trusts now. So there's hundreds of thousands of people involved in that. In fact, the whole membership of the 46 trusts across Britain and Ireland, Northern Ireland, is now in excess of 900,000. Scottish Wildlife Trust itself has got about 40,000 members. So we're able to do some stuff to kind of take things forward a wee bit in our own network, using things like the appeal leaflet, and then also doing a special coloured one that went into this magazine, Natural World, that at the time was sent to every member of wildlife trusts across the UK. And obviously, I should have brought the T-shirt across with "Let's Crack It." I saw Maggie was wearing hers yesterday, actually. Oh well. Right,
there's one there at the front.
There's one there. Yeah. There we are. Yeah. Yeah, it's still cracking on. That's great. Yeah. And within that magazine, there was also this little brochure that was put to try and draw attention to Eigg being an amazing place for wildlife, for heritage, for landscape, and for people. And sometimes in post-buyout analyses that I've seen with even, some PhD studies and things, they seem to not quite get it, that actually the Wildlife Trust publicity, the Wildlife Trust involvement in this and also reaching its members wasn't all about wildlife. It was about the joined up nature of things. Here's part of what I wrote in that article back then. If partners in the Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust become co-guardians of the island estate, practical plans for regeneration can be put into action. Natural heritage can be central to them. This is only proper in a place where people see wildlife as part of the very fabric of island life, part of their hope for the future. And then later on, orchids, eagles, corncrakes, otters, and much other wildlife could benefit, as would many island people. For human enterprise will be absolutely crucial. So that's not trying to divide the wildlife case from the human case. And in fact, I remember beyond the buyout, I'd been invited to speak to the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So in some ways, North Cheshire, it's in the heart of politically what you might think is really blue-rind Tory country, and this was back in the 1980s, you remember, so I'm using that term advisedly. And I was even put up overnight by the parents of the prospective Tory candidate for that. So it was kind of interesting, but although the buyout had succeeded, I gave a kind of no-holds-barred account of why the buyout was so important and what this could mean, not just for Eigg, but why land reform was important. So you can imagine the audience there, and you imagine I thought I was speaking, trying to do something in the lion's den. One of the few times in my life I got an ovation for that talk. And I think that speaks volumes, because it means that it's not as simple as saying the people that supported the buyout through wildlife trusts, and as Maggie and others know, actually the slice of the financial pie that came from the wildlife trusts was pretty significant. There was a lot of money was raised through that. It's not the case that they were only doing it for the otters and the flowers and so on, much though they cared about that. It was much more. Having said that, with the wildlife in mind, then I also remember the way that with the launch of the buyout campaign, there were some decorations on the wall with some of the school kids. And I remember I found it certainly helped me. I thought it was great that standing up and, you know, pushing the boat out as we were doing, there was a crayon drawing of a golden eagle behind me that had been done by somebody in the school. And I thought, that's fantastic, because it means that this person, I think it was a wee girl that had done it, thinks of this as just both an amazing creature to be having that she can see, but also this is appropriate to put this at the start of things. So that's that aspect of things. I'm watching my time here, and I don't want to make you fall off your seats with snoring here, but I must think with one other buyout memory, and it's from Not in the Highland Ball in Edinburgh, which was a great event. I know, yeah. There was some fantastic performers there, a rolling programme. Elaine C. Smith, I think, was helping to compare it. Was Michael Dick exactly, and I'm going to mention it. Did Michael Mara play at that, or maybe he didn't? No, I think it was hoped that he would. Anyway, sorry, Michael. You know, yeah, I know. But Dick Gaughan very much did, because I seem to remember Dick, in true fashion, getting people to try and shut up towards the bar area at the back so that they could listen to the words. And I can't remember clearly whether he sang this or not, but one of my favourite Dick Gaughan songs is his rendition of Burns' Westland Winds. Yeah. And I think he almost certainly would have you know, done that on the night. And just a wee bit of that is: the partridge loves the fruitful fells, the plover loves the mountain, the woodcock haunts the lonely dells, the soaring hern the fountain, o'er lofty groves the cushat roves, the path of man to shun it, the hazel bush o'erhangs the thrush, the flowering thorn the linnet. Thus every kind their pleasure find, the savage and the tender, some social join and leagues combine, some solitary wander. Avaunt away the cruel sway, tyrannic man's dominion, the sportsman's joy, the murdering ploy, cry, the fluttering gory pinion. So again, there's that empathy with nature. So beyond the buyout, well, I'm not wanting to take calls to Newcastle. You all in the room know all the many things that have happened since then, that although there can be some bumps in the road, there's so many good things that have happened on Eigg. So many things that seem to encapsulate the aspirations of people that care about land reform, that care about community ownership, would say can flow from community ownership. Things like provision of housing, things like looking at the infrastructure, including use of energy, renewable energy, thinking about aspects almost of a circular economy here, thinking of population increase. And here you are. I mean, at the time of the buyout, there were 64 people living on Eigg. And now, I don't know what it is, 110 plus, 150. So, I mean, you know, you're on the way to being double the population at the time of the buyout. And also the confidence that came from it. And I saw that almost from week one. Thinking of the champagne bottle that Colin and the others popped on that day. Colin.
Why champagne?
Wasn't it champagne?
It was.
Oh, well, I was hoping it was champagne.
Why was it champagne?
Oh, why was it champagne? I know. With that, then I've often thought that it's like the cork came out of that bottle, sadly though it was champagne, and then the ideas started to be released. It was like something that had been suppressed. It's like, oh, you know what? Oh, there's that idea. Oh, nah. Why bother? Suddenly it was that. Oh, there's that idea. Yeah, if I bothered actually this way, then maybe I'd get this other person to help. Maybe this would go. And I've been gobsmacked by the diversity and the richness of what has happened on Eigg since the buyout. It's just gone on and on and on to astonish me. And coming last year to the official opening of Anlamrig, that just pulled it all together. I mean, what a joined up piece of structure and thinking and people. I mean, most communities anywhere in Scotland, including mainland Scotland, would give their eye teeth for something that is as good as Anlamrig, including the way that you're building in the circularity of the economy there, the sustainability of it. It's absolutely amazing. So I think I'll start to conclude actually now by saying that you on Eigg, and you know, I'm wary that I'm kind of buttering you up an awful lot here, but it's, you know, but basically I believe it that you are living what a lot of communities would like to achieve. In terms of empowerment, you've got there, or you're still on that road, but what you're doing is amazing. Earlier on, Vanessa was in touch with somebody, Hannes Lorentzen, who came out here with some Europeans back post-buyout who were trying to learn about Eigg and think of some of the ideas. And some of those people across Europe now still think fondly of Eigg and think of how that influenced them in their ideas about community development, about rural development. They're still doing it, you know, nearly 30 years on. So that is very much at the core of what I'm thinking, that in terms of trusting people to be wild, kind of goes without saying, you know how to do that on Eigg in the fullest sense of the phrase, but also you know how to do it in terms of respecting the life that's around you. And you know how to do it in terms of what Simon Fraser and the others helped to set in motion. And Simon's role in the buyout, as John has described, was immense, both through his good-natured character and also through the things that he was able to winkle out. I remember there was one thing, a sort of planning meeting partway through when there's still things like, you know, was Pavarotti going to try and come in and have the place as an opera retreat, or, you know, and that's true, you know, it's actually true. But somehow or other, and I don't know, it's Simon's skill, he'd managed to get access to papers that he came to the meeting, and you remember this? He said, saw these papers, and I've worked out how much Maruma is paying in interest pretty much per week to service his loans to all these rather heavy financiers that he'd tapped to get the money for his short-term ownership of the island. And it was huge. And that actually, from memory, gave the planning team some of the confidence to just hang on in there for a bit longer, because this guy is under the screws here with what he's paying. But it was Simon's cleverness in getting access to the right material that allowed us to know that. And that's just a wee example, but not often known about or quoted really, of just the sheer skill of the man. So, you know, thank you, Simon, for that. Thank you all for just, well, both putting up with me over the last half hour with, apparently, I don't think anybody's actually fallen asleep here, but also for the inspiration that I think, well, I've had personally from you. But I mean it, that Eigg is thought of in terms of how people think of community development in a good way in many different places. But please, and many of you do it, build in nature to that as part of the picture. Because at this time, as I said at the start, climate and nature crisis, we're on the blooming international flight path here, and we're clocking that there were flights to places like Los Angeles, Montreal, New York, etc., going over. When we were down at Lag Bay earlier, you could see the contrails going over. You could see them going far, far, far across the Atlantic. And of course, sadly, in terms of divide of ideas, a lot of the stuff that's going on generated from across the Atlantic is the complete opposite of what this community embodies. It's the complete opposite of a sense of actually sharing and being part of something that's bigger than your own selfish self-interest. It's not to do with that. Okay, everyone wants to, make their living, have a warmth in their house, have a roof over their head, that sort of thing. But beyond that, you want to actually be part of something that's bigger than yourself. The trouble is now, as we know internationally, we've got men, and it usually is men, with ridiculous egos, and I won't go further than that, but who are distorting our whole vision of what it means to be human, and our whole vision of what it means to be true to your own society. So a society like Eigg, where people work cooperatively, where people care about nature, where people see the plastic on the beach and do something about it and pull stuff together, where people will, like Tasha and Wes, will be collecting native trees and growing them in a nursery that is now being given the thumbs up by, formal forestry authorities across Scotland. They'll do that, and they'll do it in a way that, okay, is the business, but also through what the tree nursery is doing. Think of it, you've got a hazel, for example, a wee hazel tree, and the hazel associated with, the Celtic nuts of knowledge and a certain wisdom. And that little tree, in its own background, contains arguably thousands of years of Eigg heritage. And that's now helping to regenerate the forest, the woodland on Eigg, and it's sending out that beyond Eigg to other places. I was hearing yesterday about how Skye's, buying Eigg nursery trees now. So I think on the ground that is great, but actually symbolically it's also great, because just as you've been influencing people with ideas about what community ownership can do, you're influencing people in terms of what natural regeneration can do. So by building nature and people together, then that to me is the way forward. And I'll end just by saying that yesterday, one of the really magic things was going for a walk along the lower slopes up to Cruachan, beyond Kildonan, and seeing so many lapwings, peasies, whatever you call them, hearing them, and then hearing that beautiful, beautiful sound of the curlews bubbling away. That wild, wild sound that's both musical and kind of crazy at the same time. But it all comes through and it makes sense. And I'm thinking of the beauty of that, and I'm thinking of the determination of those birds to actually make something of the spring and summer. I'm thinking of some of the craziness almost of what's going on in their voices, but they're still doing it and they're achieving it. And I think here, that's what Eigg to me embodies. It's a kind of wildness in the best way. So many people, and I'd say through the Scottish Wildlife Trust, have trusted Eigg to be wild. My goodness, you've actually achieved it in ways that we would never have predicted. So keep on, Eigg, keep being wild, and keep inspiring us way away from Eigg. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Kenny. That's absolutely perfect and right on the topic, and just a bit under 2 hours as well. But thanks for that, for really setting the scene. So any reflections on Simon or SWT? I think we need to recognise SWT's anniversary tonight. That's important as well. And, buyout, Simon, SWT on those kind of topics. And Anne, would you like to be as bold as to start off? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here, and my sister, Zine, where she is. Of course, she was Simon's secretary through all this. So I have to say, probably she should be really instead of me. But Oh my goodness, so many memories, so many lovely memories, and it's just amazing to be here in such beautiful weather. It's absolutely been gorgeous, glorious today, really lovely. But oh no, I just have fond memories of him kind of going off to Eigg, you know, on so many occasions, you know, and he absolutely loved it. Loved coming here.
He wasn't working all the time.
I know. That's right. Oh, well, yeah. I have to say, because, well, probably, he just, obviously, the whole idea, you know, from the very beginning, he was just so involved, and especially, you know, with Ascent before that. But definitely, Eigg was just so close to his heart. You know, he had really a special, strong bond, you know, with Eigg. And of course, the thing is, sorry, it continued, you know, even after the buyout to, he just looked on you as his extended family, basically, you know, coming here of course he was the chairman of the trust initially for a few years, so many, he never could say a bad word, you know, about his experiences in Eigg. It was just all so good, and it's amazing how connections, kind of family connections, even since then. When I used to work as a district nurse back in Lewis, and working in a beautiful part of Lewis, Eigg and Bernera, and I go into one of my patients one day and say, oh well, Anna, here now that, you know, your husband is very busy working in Eigg just now, and it turns out to be actually, you know, the Katrina's mother and father. He was alive, you know. I used to kind of visit him too, and I have to say it was just so amazing. Here was this lady who was Ina. Her husband, I believe, was John, the missionary here in Eigg, and so it was just so interesting, you know, the connection there with Katrina, and also roll on the years, and her son Simon works at the Coast Guard, with Bristow's, and kind of getting a call out to Eigg this evening, and he kind of lands. I'm not sure, was it beside your mother-in-law's house? And it was just so amazing. It was Simon there, and I think Colin, you just, I don't know, did you obviously hadn't realised that it was Simon. I don't know, you made the connection. And it was
young Simon.
Yes, young Simon, of course, was flying. And it's amazing how all these different connections, you know, to Eigg, even since then. But as I say, really, he just loved, you know, coming here. And of course, I had to get yourselves involved in his, you know, at his 50th party back home. I just thought, well, would it be a great idea to invite
Great idea.
Not all. But of course, totally, that's right. It was a total surprise for Simon. And you know what? I am so pleased to say it worked a treat. I got Maggie and Colin and Marie and Wes up. And I thought, a great idea to dress them up in, you know, kind of in suits. Like one was a gorilla suit, the other one was a bear suit, and a dog. Oh no, we do. I'm sure I do have footage of it somewhere. But it was just so lovely. So the band was playing, and I kind of gave them that when they. So you can imagine the scene, and it was that kind of. Johnny Be Good number, you know, that we're playing. So you all came in, the three of you, in these the suits, and I had said to Maggie, "No, Maggie, before you go over and get Simon. He's sitting such and such along, and just take him up to the floor to dance." Well, it worked so well. I have to say, it was brilliant. Maggie, and she was sweating under this gorilla suit. But anyway, it was so good. You pulled Simon up, and he hadn't a clue who was, dancing with him. And I have to say, he absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. It was such a lovely surprise for him that night.
I didn't have a clue until she started laughing.
But I have to say, it was just so lovely. And then when you came over to Callanish for a Cayley, and And the thing about it too, it wasn't as if he was a kind of a solicitor that was kind of working in a big office somewhere, big fancy suit. He was just kind of a crofter himself. And that's what the good thing. I mean, he'd be coming to Eigg, but then going back home, putting on the overall, going out to the croft himself. So I mean, he could relate to you all, so well. I mean, so as I say, it was just so many lovely memories, at the time.
It's great that you're here tonight, Anne, and sharing all of that with everyone. It's a great privilege for us that you're here. So, Colin, are you anything to?
No, not really. No. I think I was just here to pick up the number.
Gender balance.
Well, just one briefly, just kind of memories. We went when Gia was going to do have the buyout, and or thinking about it, and quite a few, half a dozen of people, or 7 or 8, came over to see what we had done, and taking them over on the back of that. And they were pretty split. I mean, there was quite a good split of the community that came over, and some of them were dead against it, as you can imagine, and some were kind of dubious. And it was on the back of that they went away, and I think almost all of them, the 7 or 8 of them, just when they saw what we had done, it started just a few of the subsidiary groups were on the go by that time. So one of them was Eigg Construction, and we had started renovating the houses, and they were just kind of blown away. I mean, they understood that would never have happened under any other circumstance. And when Maggie and I got the opportunity to go down to their buyout or handover, and of course Simon was there. So he was taking us round, and by that time he knew all the farmers and the community, and we were going round and round. And then it was just one of these things, how one minute he was so fun, but he never lost the seriousness kind of thing. And so we were going round, and the phone rang. It seems that long ago I didn't even think it was mobile phones, but of course there was. And
he wasn't carrying a big phone round in his pocket.
No, I don't remember that. But anyway, the phone rang, and he said, "Oh, I'll have to take this." So that obviously Maggie would have been in the front, and I'm in the back, and I'm going, "Oh, look at this big cheese having to take this phone call in the morning on the handover." And he said, "Shh, you just be quiet." And so I didn't really think any significance of it. He said that was the guy that was going to hand the money over to that was a banker or something. And you could have lost it or whatever. So I felt like I was about 15-year-old. That was just one of these things. He was always on the case.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, fun as well. Nora, what about yourself?
Well, I met Simon just once, didn't really know him. Obviously heard a lot about him, but I guess my inspiration then comes from Birdie, and my work I've done with Scottish Wildlife Trust. It's John that's inspired me, and I learned so much from him. And just wanting to carry on that legacy of his, all the amazing work that he did. And trying to carry on with the rest of the community here, and definitely, working with people and wildlife. It's always been my motto personally, And so we'll just keep on doing that for Birdie.
Yeah. So an Eigg resident first, an SWT employee
Yes.
second. Did you hear that again? Any other comments from anyone about on the topic?
I do have a little, I wasn't sure if I was brave enough to say it.
Just for a minute, let me just get.
I found, I've been looking
Just-
through,
Hang on a second. I'm going to. Can I give you a shot of this? Well, we need to.
sit there and
The viewers at home need to.
do with it.
Can I pin this on? This could take some time.
Just go easy then, no, you're flying out, Mr. Hutchison.
Right, tell you what. Can you hold
See,
it?
this is why I just wanted to chat there.
I know.
Right,
Right, can I hold it and you do the thing? Is that going? I'm trying to hide. Okay.
I was rooting through because I knew I had a picture of Simon Fraser, and actually, because he's so tall, the head was lopped off. But I say it caught a moment which kind of means everything to me in the world. Well, also because in the picture is my mum, so that's part
How's
of
the
that.
dancing?
So I had that, and then today I opened up this book, and this is a set of poems that have been put together from Aidan McCohen, and it's called Friendship. Never before has contentment set in so readily, acceptance and to be accepted, in surroundings that only a short time ago were unknown to me. Yet surroundings that are familiar to my heart, surface deep but warm, ready to expand on both levels, given the chance. Friendship, a rarity and beauty shared only by those who seek it, which meant everything in this picture.
That's so lovely. Isn't that?
Some of these poems are so poignant and difficult to read sometimes as well. I've found that. Any other comments from anyone else? Okay, Maggie, I think we'll probably start to move things on now, if that's okay. And thank you very much, Kenny, all the other contributors. We didn't rehearse this tonight, Kenny and I, but I'm a huge Burns fan as well. And I wanted to look at another poet who lived at the same time in Argyll, Duncan Ban McIntyre, and he lived at the same time as Burns, although earlier and later. He was about 80 or 90 when he died, something like that. You can do the sums in a minute when I give you his date. So he was born in, we think, 1724, died in 1812. And so same time as Burns, spanning that time. And so he lived, he was born in Glenorchy, just north of Tyne-Drum. And a lot of his poems are about Bendoran and that area. And that's, as you know, people in the island here at least know, when you drive north from Tyne-Drum, you see this conical hill, and that's Bendoran. And this song is about that. So he was born in that area. He was a forester and a stalker, I guess. And the second half of his life, he went to work in the Edinburgh Town Guard, and eventually came back to the West Highlands. And a lot of his poems, he was illiterate, a lot of his poems were dictated and sung. And he was a land activist, I suppose. He wrote about the exploitation of land at that time, the overgrazing. He wrote very detailed poems about deer and how the deer moved and that type of thing, and descriptive of the land and the importance of these deer forests, as he called them, and we had to look after these for the future. Now this particular song, Kate Dúranach is his last farewell to the Ben. So it's a kind of song that you would sing at a funeral, or when someone's completed their Munros, if you like. And so it's a great song. And so he wrote this about 1804, we think. He came back and this was about his last farewell, as he thought, to the band. So it's an Argyll song, appropriate as well because Simon spent his early teenage years, I think, in Argyll, and he would recognise this as a pupil at Oban High School. So Donnach Ban, Kate Jirinach Nambiaun, a last farewell to the mountain. So it starts off saying, yesterday I was on Ben Doran, and this is what I saw. And he speaks about getting health and nourishment from the burns. He speaks about the times in the sheilings, with the girls who were up in the summer sheilings and the like, getting up early, going out after deer and that type of thing. And the last verse is a massive salute to the mountain, saying, these are priceless places that we need to look after. So Donnach Ban's writing this in 1804, and it just seemed really appropriate, to bring people and land and all that sort of thing together. Vamin yem bain doran snakor charomi anjolach hunami na glauntan snabiauntichen a banyago bishin and shaller gevin vin gimach ger na slevchen nur viag griena keri sa viag na fe a langani Stokkerach a galavin, gushalagarach nam bialichin, don mach a year garavlich, skumbana mokchin gupalami, and tushke glan sam fala, mulach nam bianarte, huchich gufas mi, sherain goslanches falonjoch. Hwyr mi gres y marach i'r arian a banyago, ri clwych ys mir ys manran, ri'n cain ys blan an calacan. Bwhwys an nagin atar, gwmarach sy'n an dras dawn, siepec yn fi gam ffagel, nw'r hanig drag o'n jalwch. Mohoreles na frihen, us mir velchak na piananiat, lepilor wain es firusk, jochus o rivok janolto, na blaren a prishel, snafastichen halin vor, o sachelik mi miat, gubrach mo vile piano klo. So it's my pleasant job, my really pleasant job, to hand over to Maggie and Stuart, who are going to take us to the next stage in this evening's proceedings. This is as we prepare our Horlicks before we go to bed and switch off the live stream. Yeah. Okay. Oh, microphone. Yeah. Again, another fumble. Here we go, Maggie. Oh, that was quick.
Offering my... Going to stand up?
Yeah, do I have to stand up?
Oh, come on.
All right. Maggie said, I sent Maggie an email yesterday going, what are we supposed to be talking about? And she replied, it was like 2 lines, and one was, can you go first, please? I suppose none of us would be standing here right now if it wasn't for the likes of Simon Fraser and the Eigg folk of the 1990s who actually thought that they could do this. And that it was something worthwhile doing, and obviously Simon Fraser played a huge part in making that possible. And we have achieved so much as an island, as a community since then, and as has been touched upon, the community has grown exponentially compared to a lot of places in this part of the world, you know, gone from in the 60s to the 115, with another wee one on the way very shortly, so we've got an extra one in the population. And the community has achieved so much in that time, and again, lots of this has been touched on with the building of the original Anne Lamerick, with the tree nursery, with the forestry, then obviously Eigg Electric, you know, first in the world using combined 3 hydro, wind power and solar to create a small microgrid that for the first time ever gave us 24-hour power. You know, gone were driving through Cleedale where all you'd hear was as you drove past everybody's house, and you'd hear the diesel generators. And you know, you could you got used to, you could work out whose wasn't working too well and stuff like that. And then obviously recently we've had the redevelopment of Anne Lamerick, you know, 25 years after it happened. We didn't imagine that the community was going to get this big, and also that, you know, the people visiting the island, that you know, we'd outgrown the original building, and we didn't think that, you know, 25, 28 years ago. And so we redeveloped that, and now we've obviously got the housing project. So for the first time ever, the trust is just about to start building new houses so that we can increase the housing stock. You know, so what we as a community, and starting with the generation, Colin, Maggie, Simon, Karen, Camille, these people who had the, you know, the vision to think we can do this back in the 90s, and that's why we're all here today from what they've done, and we're a community that's growing stronger and is keeping to go that way. And I think, you know, that's the main toast, is to the people of Eigg, and let's hope that we keep moving forward in that sort of vein.
Yes,
Indeed. Well, I think I'm a bit, for once in my life, I'm a bit lost for words, because I think everybody said it already tonight. All that it means to people, all that's been achieved is quite remarkable. I mean, 28 years later, you would have never thought it. I mean, you know, there were periods before that I would say the people on the island were really depressed, because there was so little happening, and every time we thought of something that we could maybe do, we were blocked, just like you were saying about Wildlife Trust and John. That's exactly what, you know, we had lots of ideas. We were never short of ideas, but most of them would never come to any kind of fruition. And that just, I mean, the buyout did that. I mean, it's probably hard for a lot of people to even imagine what it was like before, that didn't live through it all. Because it was pretty tough at times. The buyout, I'm not saying it's been easy, because Colin's famous row, we never said it would be easy. And it's not, it's been really tough at times. But I think, and again, it's all due to the folk who live here, and people that keep on coming to live here. We've had loads of people over the years that have arrived as volunteers, some for the Wildlife Trust, some for our trust, some from Crofters, and they've stayed, because, I mean, I know what I felt like when I first came here. It felt like I've lived in a lot of different places, but for some reason I felt completely at home the minute I got here, and a lot of that was to do with the beautiful nature of the island, but most of it was to do with the people who live here, you know, and just that amazing sense of community. So yes, I've forgotten where I'm going with this now. But I think, yeah, basically, the reason it's been so successful and the reason we keep on going is because of all the folk here who put in, I mean, hundreds of volunteer hours, hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours. But that's because people care passionately about Eigg. I mean, and that's the bit that knits us all together, is Eigg. It's a wonderful place, it's a beautiful place, and it's a fantastic community. And thank you to everybody that spoke tonight, and thank you everybody that came to listen. And yeah, and I think we're just getting the drinks round.
Can I just say one last thing? I think there has to be a big thank you to this woman here, who has been a rock since the beginning of the trust, has been the trust secretary now for 28 years and still going, puts in a lot of extra hours. So Oh, do I get one of them? Oh, will you keep them both?
Has everybody got a drink?
Firstly, here's to Simon Fraser and everything he did for land reform in Scotland. Yeah. So,
So we have a very good friend, Simon.
Oh, yes, you're very good. Oh, yeah.
And here's to the next 28 years. I might not manage another 28 years, but I'm sure the rest of you will.
here's to Eigg in the future.
Here's to Eigg.
Yay!
Yeah.
Keep doing twists.
Thank you very much.